rely on legal advice and services that our office provides. It supports law enforcement, particularly our county attorneys in Greater Minnesota, who rely on us to help them prosecute criminal cases. And we help people in Minnesota afford their lives and live with dignity and respect by pursuing consumer fraud claims and standing up for people who play by the rules and simply expect to be treated fairly in this economy, but who unfortunately sometimes are not treated that way. Before I discuss my budgets, my office's two change items, allow me to make a few quick points about the AG's overall budget. Let me introduce Mr. Ray Smith, who's here to assist me in this matter. The first point I want to make is that the Attorney General's office budget has been flat in actual dollars from the general fund for the last 3 biennia. Compared to its 2002 level, the general fund appropriation to the Attorney General's office is 20% lower in actual dollars. And in terms of purchasing power, it's 60% lower than 2002. Today, the Attorney General's office is operating with half the number of attorneys we had 20 years ago. And then we had 260 lawyers, now we have 130. Then we had about 540 staff, now we have about 340. We have taken dramatic cuts as we are attempting to serve the people of this great state. And in fact, the difficulties that we face have become greater, not less. Our society is more litigious, not less. State government has become more complex, not less. And people's ability to afford their lives has become more challenging and not less. The ingenuity of the fraudsters is greater than it was. 20 years ago, we were not having to fight cybercrime and computer scams. But we are having to confront those things today, and those things take resources. The threat to people's health and their safety, including things like the opioid crisis, have become more daunting, not less. Let me talk about the change request for a moment. In this context of the greater challenges that people of our state are facing, I thought carefully about the change request, and I thought carefully about what we would ask you for. Please note that we know that no matter, even though we're not in a budgetary crisis as we have been in the years past, we know that it's all that you are careful stewards of the public dollars, and we respect that. So we ask for things that we really needed. Let me say, first of all, the first is maintaining and stabilizing attorneys. We do have the smartest, hardworking, and most dedicated lawyers of any public law firm or public interest attorneys in the state. I'm proud of the attorneys at our office. They're good, and they do a great job. Our attorneys have many opportunities to work elsewhere, but they choose to serve the people of Minnesota, and I'm proud of them for that. I think they should be compensated adequately to be able to stay at the Minnesota Attorney General's office. But the fact is, they're the most underpaid attorneys among the largest public law firms. Our attorneys are paid on average 13 to 33% less than the average attorney at the other large public law firms in our state, and I'm referring to Ramsey County, Hennepin County, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. This request that we're making would not close the gap. It would not bring us to parity, but it would simply stop the gap from getting bigger and would allow us to maintain some institutional expertise and memory as we are confronting large law firms that represent some of the people we have to take to court sometimes. It's important to retain the expertise of our attorneys billed while working for us so that we can represent the interests of the state of Minnesota and protect the health, welfare, and wallets of the people of Minnesota. Institutional knowledge and expertise are critical. If attorneys can only work for us for a few years before just the demands of family life force them to go seek better pay elsewhere, then we cannot serve the people of Minnesota in the way that we really should. The second change request is for enhanced criminal prosecution and public safety. County attorneys across Minnesota, especially from greater Minnesota, have repeatedly told me that they need a better partnership and greater access to the services of our office. I agree with them, and we believe that this change item, the second one, is critical, not only in the homicide cases, but in complicated cases that may involve everything from labor trafficking to sex trafficking and complex computer crime. In 20 years, the number of attorneys in the Attorney General's office who work full-time with county attorneys on criminal matters has fallen from 12 to 1. County attorneys from smaller counties have told us that it's not enough just to help them, for them to do justice for victims of crime in greater Minnesota. It's just not enough. They need more from us, and we're asking you to help us do that. It's important to meet their request for more help. It's also important not to do it at the expense of the other work we do in greater Minnesota. I must say, in all candor, that the proposal that we received from our senators does put us in a position of having to help people in greater Minnesota with a criminal problem, but then have to ignore them with a civil problem. I'll explain it as I go forward. It's important to meet the request for more help. It's also important not to do it at the expense of other work we do for greater Minnesota. I have previously sent you a letter from Bob Small, who's the executive director of the nonpartisan Minnesota County Attorneys Association, in support of our request. I also will tell you that County Attorney Mark Freeman called me today and said, if you need me, I will do all I can to help explain why you need these two change items. The two change item requests are products of a lot of thought, research, and engagement with stakeholders and constituents. They're well-founded requests. They are in the governor's budget and in the House State Government Finance budget, and I thank Governor Walz and Chair Nelson for that. But we need help from all units of our government, including our Senate partners, because we're all the same state. The same people need our help, and we need the support. Let me just talk about the effect of the Senate bill. The Senate bill will reduce the ability of the Attorney General's office to meet the needs of Minnesotans. It does not include new funding for the two change requests that the governor recommended and the House passed. In addition, it cuts 3.5% to our base budget at the Attorney General's office after we had had no increase at all in 6 years. Beyond that, it also reallocates more than 6.5% of our current budget to assist rural county attorneys, for which we've sought new funding. Rather than making a sound investment in new funding for increased services to county attorneys, the Senate bill reallocates this amount from resources that it has already reduced. So they're saying, we're cutting you 3.5%, and we're going to wall off what you can do with money, with a lesser amount, which is simply not only reducing our ability to help Minnesotans, but it's micromanaging our office. To be clear, this reallocation amounts to an additional 6.5 cut because there's just 10% that we simply cannot help fight the opioid crisis. We cannot help protect seniors from consumer frauds, a whole host of things that are absolutely necessary. But make no mistake, the reallocation is a cut. Now, back when the Attorney General's office had 260 lawyers instead of 130, as we do today, we had 12 attorneys working full-time with our county attorneys on criminal prosecution instead of the one we have today. I'm glad the Senate sees the need for that work to go back up. That is important, but we need additional resources to do it, or we just take from everybody else, and we don't do things we need to do. I think Minnesotans deserve both effective criminal prosecution and protection from fraud and abuse. The Senate bill seems to be saying that when it comes to fraud and abuse, Minnesotans are going to be on their own. The 6.5 cut plus the 3.5 cut to our base amount to a 10% cut in real Attorney General dollars to fund our budget. And I would simply say that is, we have worked to be as efficient as we possibly can. The dollar amount that the legislature deposited into our account at the beginning of this biennium is 20% less in actual dollars compared to 2002. So the Senate bill actually imposes a 10% cut on top of this. The impact of the 10% cut would be severe. Allow me to just highlight 3 areas that greatly concern me. First, the Senate bill harms our ability to generate revenue for the state of Minnesota. I think that people across the state should know that the Attorney General's office operates as the chief protector of Minnesota taxpayers. We bring in revenue to the state. $868 million. $868 million alone in 2018. We also save the state money by effectively representing the state against claims made against it. For example, we will likely save taxpayers more than $54 million with our defense of the Unclaimed Property Act. Our office is a sound investment, and with the cut in the Senate bill, our ability to generate more revenue and save the state money would suffer greatly. The Senate bill also harms our ability to hold opioid manufacturers accountable. Minnesota currently has several open lawsuits against manufacturers and distributors of opioids, which we believe, in which we allege deceptive trade practices, consumer fraud, monopolization, unreasonable restraint of trade, antitrust violations, and other fraudulent conduct in relation to opioids. And I know I don't need to remind anybody, but it's critical that we put on the record that at least 1.5, as many as 2 Minnesotans die a day from opioid addiction, and 150 Americans die from opioid addiction. We're trying to save lives. So let me say that I am greatly concerned that a cut of this magnitude will damage our ability to represent the state and our constituents in this once-in-a-generation opportunity, particularly in regard to opioids. As states begin to settle with opioid manufacturers and distributors, Minnesota needs a full complement of its best, most experienced attorneys at the table to negotiate all the restitution that this state is due. We need to keep and retain our best trained lawyers and their institutional knowledge and expertise to stand up against extremely highly paid lawyers who have the best technology. The Senate bill also harms our ability to serve the people of Greater Minnesota. Greater Minnesota faces many issues beyond criminal prosecution, including the opioid crisis, but there are also farmers struggling to keep their farms and their way of life. There are telecommunications challenges. Minnesotans aren't always getting what they pay for from their telecom providers. We are in litigation and looking to make sure that people get the services that they pay for and deserve. And there are scammers who are increasingly sophisticated in preying on senior citizens. Many of them live in Greater Minnesota. So let me wrap up by simply making a few closing comments. The Senate bill harms our ability to help all Minnesotans afford their lives. Unfortunately, today, it's very tough for people to make ends meet all across our state and across our country if you're a working person. People cannot afford prescription drugs. We're trying to change that. People are dying because they cannot afford their insulin. We're in litigation confronting these institutions that are gouging them. More people are dying because of opioid epidemic, and families and communities are being devastated. Senior citizens are increasingly being ripped off by scammers, and young people can't be financially independent because they're trapped by student loans, and farmers can't stay on the land any longer. Many are having to leave because of the difficulties of making it in a small and medium-sized farm today. The Attorney General's office is trying to stop all these things, but we need resources to do it. And I simply urge all members to consider the difficulties that the whole state is facing now, and understand that we cannot protect the people by cutting the Attorney General's office. We need some resources to do our job, and we ask for your help to do it. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And Mr. Ray Smith is an expert in our budget and is prepared to help.
Senator Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorney General Ellison.
Thank you.
Could you give me the total FTEs of the Attorney General's office at this time? Any vacant positions, unfilled positions? And how many are attorneys in your office? If you have it now, that would be great.
Yeah, so
Attorney General. Please identify yourself to the tape.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, Fire. Ray Smith, Director of Finance for the Attorney General's Office. We have approximately 335 FTEs at any given time here at the current budget that we have. In terms of vacancies, we may have one or two that are in the process of being filled, but no.
And
Senator Keith.
thank you. And how many attorneys out of that approximately 335?
Mr. Smith.
Chair Ellison, approximately 130 attorneys.
I didn't quite hear that, sorry.
Approximately 130 attorneys.
130 attorneys out of 335, so there are 200 FTEs that are not attorneys. Interesting. And so I was also going to ask the question, you mentioned it went from 12 down to 1. And could you just clarify the 12 down to 1 attorney for a particular area? Could you just clarify that again?
Attorney General.
Mr. Chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, when Attorney General Skip Humphrey was in office, they had, the Attorney General's office had about 12 people working on criminal prosecution, servicing Greater Minnesota. As you know, original jurisdiction for criminal prosecution is in the counties. So they would ask us to assist. We're down to about 1 full-time. We are able to shift in 1.5 as needed, but 1 person who only does that.
Senator Keith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So what I hear from this is that it was in the distribution of the attorneys, it was a decision of the Attorney General's office to shift those functions away from assisting the locals, going down from 12 to 1. A question I have, in addition to that, though, is in regards to the number of attorneys that are being used for federal lawsuits and other lawsuits that are going on that involve suing the federal government. How many of these 130 attorneys are working on the federal lawsuits?
Attorney General.
Senator Kickmeyer, we have 1 lawyer who on a part-time basis works on some federal lawsuits. But the thing is, ma'am, the federal lawsuits that we're involved in have to do with protecting the people of the state of Minnesota. I mean, we have 130 lawyers. Some of them represent our state agencies. We have over 100 of those. We have lawyers who do affirmative litigation protecting consumers. We don't have anyone to spare. And I would note that, yes, it's true that we have staff who are not attorneys, but those people are investigators who go out and collect information. They're paralegals, they're legal secretaries. They are people who work very hard every day. And if we had to have attorneys do that work, that would not be the most efficient use of anyone's time. We have paralegals who make sure that when we win cases or settle them, that people get their restitution checks. So I'd like to be clear, the people who are not lawyers at our office do vitally important critical work.
Thank you.
Senator Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do recognize that, just that in your testifying, though, it was exclusively on behalf of the attorneys, not the other 2 members, so I just wanted to clarify that. That's all I have for now.
Representative Dean, and we don't limit the questions because we have a big agenda. Representative Dean, if we can be short.
I'll be very short. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Attorney General. So when I look at the numbers and I look at the budget, you had mentioned that in real dollars since 2002, I believe it's a 60% cut to the office. And even if we fund the 4.25 over the next biennium, I believe it's still a 40% cut. And yet we're expecting you to do more work in the meantime, and I would agree, if you could just speak to, so, you know, those numbers and what they truly mean, and I think the testimony you spoke briefly about, what this means to some of our counties and cities, so.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Dean, thank you for the question. The reality is that we do a lot of things. We do criminal prosecution, we represent agencies and boards, we do affirmative litigation to help consumers. But we simply can't do all the things we used to do given the reduction in the budget. We don't have the money that we used to, we can't hire the staff, and we can't retain the staff because, as I tried to point out in my testimony, we've seen a growing delta between what other public law offices can pay and what we can pay. And so we're losing institutional knowledge, we're losing expertise. At the same time, we have lawyers who are involved in multi-state litigation, for example, the opioid cases, in which there are literally millions of documents that you need technology to try to keep track of. And yet, we're behind the times when it comes to technological innovation. When Governor Walz informed me that we had to adjust our budget request downward because of the forecast, we did so. But it was technology did suffer. We are doing excellent work for the resources that we have, but given the needs of society, we simply coming to you with what we need to do to help the people of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.